Okay, so silkies. Everybody loves silkies, right?
Right.
They're like the fluffy clouds of the chicken world.
They really are something else.
But, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's wondered this, but those crests, those massive crests they have on their head.
Yeah, the ones that look like they're defying gravity.
Exactly. Adorable, sure, but like, how natural is that really?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's kind of a complicated one.
And that's what we're diving into today, because it turns out those crazy crests might actually be a problem for some silkies.
Yeah, there are people out there saying breeding silkies to have those huge crests is straight up harmful. Some are even going as far as calling it torture breeding.
Strong words. But we need to figure out if there's truth behind them. So no jumping to conclusions. We're going to rely on the science here. And to guide this deep dive, we're going to be looking at the work of chicken genetics expert Sigrid van Dort.
Ah, yes. Van Dort. She's done some really interesting work on this exact topic.
She really has. And one of the most interesting things she points out is this difference you see between American silkies and European silkies. Like in the US, if you go to a show, those silkies usually have these massive crests, but they also have what's called a vaulted skull.
Right. Basically, it means the top of their skull is kind of, well, imagine someone took a normal chicken skull and just inflated the top like a balloon. It's dome-shaped instead of flat.
Yeah, and on its own,
Yeah.
I mean, some chicken breeds just have weird head shapes, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a big deal.
Well, that's where things get tricky. What Van Dort is saying is that a lot of times, those vaulted skulls in American show silkies. They're thin, like really fragile.
Like a chewing gum bubble, she said.
Yeah, exactly. A chewing gum bubble, that's a vivid way to put it. But it gets the point across, and that's where the potential for harm really comes in.
Because it's not like other crested breeds, like Polish chickens. They've got those big crests and vaulted skulls too, right? But they've been bred over so long to have thicker skulls that can handle it.
It's true. It's almost like over centuries, those Polish breeders, even without realizing it, were weeding out the birds with skulls that couldn't handle the dome.
Natural selection, right?
Right. But with the silkies, it's all about the crest. Bigger is better, seems to be the motto. And that might have meant that nobody was paying attention to whether the skull could actually support it. And what you end up with is this awful combination of a heavy crest sitting on this potentially super fragile skull.
Which, obviously, not great. Not great at all. In fact, Van Dort's research actually suggests that this is making American show silkies way more prone to injuries, head injuries, especially just from normal, everyday chicken stuff. And we're not even just talking like, oh, they might bump their heads a little more, right? This is serious stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Brain damage. That's what Van Dort is finding in some of these birds.
Their poor little brains.
It's awful. And you got to think, a chicken's brain, that's their whole world, right? Eating, seeing, not getting, snatched up by a hawk.
Right, it controls everything.
Everything. And a fragile skull, it puts all of that at risk. Van Dort even found birds that were having trouble eating because of it. They couldn't see. Their crests were literally blocking their vision. That's just sad. It's like we're so busy making them look a certain way that we've forgotten they're, living creatures.
It's a tough one, for sure, because we love our silkies, but are we loving them to death, That's what it feels like sometimes. And the thing is, this isn't just speculation. There's this really clear difference between how they're breeding silkies in America versus Europe that kind of proves the point.
Right. I was actually just about to ask you about that because it seems like those two different approaches, it's like they're running this accidental experiment,
It really is. So in Europe, a lot of breeders have moved away from that extreme vaulted skull shape. Some countries, they've even banned it in competition.
Wow, they banned it outright. Yep. They're much more about a rounded head shape. And you know what? Those really bad brain injuries we're talking about, practically unheard of in those European lines.
It's like the European breeders are saying, hey, we like the crests, but let's not go overboard. Let's let the birds actually, live a little.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. You ready for this? American breeders, they have to tie up the crests on a lot of their show birds.
Wait, seriously?
Seriously, just so the poor things can see. I mean, if that doesn't tell you something's wrong, I don't know what does.
It's like we're forcing them to look a certain way, even though it makes it harder for them to just, be chickens.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you think, is this just a silky thing? Or is it happening in other breeds, too? Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, is this just us humans messing with silkies? Or are we doing this to other breeds, too?
Right. Like, is this a symptom of a bigger problem? And, Van Dort, she seems to think it might be.
Yeah, she mentioned some other breeds in her articles that have similar problems.
The Polish chickens, for one. We were just talking about those.
Yeah, the Houthons.
Houdons, yep. And even some types of ducks.
Ducks, too. Wow. So, like, we just can't help ourselves, can we? We see something a little different, a little bigger, a little more dramatic, and we just have to make more of it.
Even if it means maybe making life harder for the animals we're supposed to be caring for. And that's a whole other conversation, isn't it? Like, whose job is it to look out for these birds? Is it the breeders, the people judging the shows, or, and this might be a little out there, but maybe even the people buying these birds?
Well, let's talk about that for a second because I'm sure some people listening right now are like, wait, seriously? I had no idea. I love silkies, but I definitely don't want to support something cruel.
Yeah.
So what can they do?
I always say, if you want to make a difference, the first step is information, right? You've got to be an educated consumer. Don't just go with the breeder who's got the fanciest website or the cheapest birds.
Do your research.
Exactly. Look for breeders who are upfront about their practices,
Yeah.
the ones who actually talk about potential health problems and aren't just trying to crank out chicks as fast as possible.
And don't be shy about asking questions.
Oh, for sure.
Ask about their breeding goals, where their birds come from, what they're doing to make sure these silkies are going to live good, healthy lives.
Because ultimately, we've got to send a message that we care about more than just how these birds look. We care about how they're treated, too.
It's about remembering that these aren't just show birds. They're living creatures. And honestly, having this conversation, it makes you think, if we can start to change how we think about breeding silkies, maybe we can change how we think about breeding other animals too.
It's a good thought. It really is.
Because even when it comes to something as, well, as cute and fluffy as chickens, there are always these bigger conversations to be had, ones that make us really examine our relationship with the animals we share this planet with.